Wyoming Territory. Autumn of 1879, the wind carried the weight of something gone wrong, as Travis Sutton rode down the dry ridge toward the edge of Bridger Hollow. The sun was low behind him, throwing long shadows across the land and dusting the pale sky in orange. He had gone out early to check the southern fence line, and he was late getting back. His two boys, Rusty and Ray, would be waiting, probably already poking at whatever stew Miss Hattie had left warming on the stove. He had not expected to find a girl sitting in the dirt by the sheriff's wagon. Travis slowed his horse when he spotted the figure near the cottonwoods, small and still, a brown dress torn at the sleeve, dust streaked up her legs. The sheriff's wagon had broken down on the slope, one wheel off, splintered and useless. But what caught Travis's eye was that the lawman was gone. He dismounted, boots crunching dry leaves as he walked toward her. She did not move. "Miss," he said quietly. She looked up, and her eyes knocked the air clean out of him. There was nothing in them, not fear, not relief, just silence. "You alone?" She nodded once. He left. Travis crouched in front of her. "Sheriff," again a nod. Her lip was split. There was blood dried along her jaw. She was maybe 20, but her shoulders were curled up like she was trying to disappear. "What's your name?" She glanced down. "Tessa." "Tessa Barnes. You hurt bad, Tessa?" "No," she whispered. "Just tired." He offered a hand. "Come on, I'll take you back to the ranch. Got 2 boys and a roof and supper if you want it." She hesitated, but when her eyes met his, something flickered. Not trust, not yet, but she took his hand. He helped her onto the horse, climbed up behind her, and they rode north toward home. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was down. The boys had lit the lanterns on the porch, and Rusty came running when he saw the horse. "Pa, who's that?" Travis kept his voice calm. "Her name's Tessa. She's staying for a bit." Ray, the younger one at 7, peeked out from behind the door. "She looks sad." "Ray," Travis said gently, "go get some water for her, all right." Tessa slid off the horse carefully, hugging her arms. She looked around at the small house, the single barn, the open field behind it. She did not say anything. Inside, Travis gave her a blanket and pointed her to the chair by the fire. The boys sat on the floor with their bowls, watching her like she might vanish. She did not eat much, did not speak. But when Rusty handed her a piece of cornbread and smiled, she took it with a soft thank you. Later, when the boys were tucked into bed, Travis stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the dark. Tessa stood across the room, holding the edge of the blanket like it tethered her. "He said he'd take me to Fort Bridger," she said finally. "Said there was a job." Travis turned. She did not look at him. "But he stopped the wagon before we got far, told me to get out, said I wasn't his problem anymore." "What happened before that?" She shook her head. "I don't want to talk about that day." He nodded once. "All right. I can clean," she said suddenly. "Cook, I can help. You do not owe me anything. I want to stay." He looked at her, really looked, and saw how she gripped the blanket like it was keeping her from falling apart. "You can stay," he said, "as long as you need." Days passed. Tessa barely spoke, but she moved through the house like she belonged. She rose early, swept the porch, folded the boys' clothes when they left them scattered. She was gentle with Ray when he spilled his milk, firm with Rusty when he argued about chores. Travis watched her from the fields, from the barn, from across the table, and something in his chest started to shift. She was quiet, but not empty. Careful, not cold. One evening, he found her in the barn brushing down his mare. She looked peaceful, her hand moving slow along the horse's side. "She likes you," he said. "She's steady. She is." Tessa glanced at him. "Why did you stop for me?" Travis shrugged. "Because you were alone. That's not a reason." "It is to me." She stared at him for a long moment, then looked down. "He made me feel like I was nothing." "You are not nothing." Her throat worked as she swallowed. He stepped closer. "You do not have to tell me what happened. But you were not supposed to be left like that." Tessa nodded, eyes wet now. "Thank you." He did not touch her, just stood close enough she could feel he meant it. Spring came slow and muddy. The snow melted off the ridge, and the boys planted corn with Travis while Tessa washed linens in the creek. She still did not talk about that day, but she laughed when Ray fell in the mud, and she wiped tears from her face when Rusty gave her a drawing of their family stick figures with her in the middle. That night, Travis sat with her on the porch after the boys had gone to sleep. "I do not know what I am to you," she said, voice barely above the wind. "You are someone who matters. I cannot go back to who I was. I do not want who you were. I want who you are now." She looked at him and for the first time really smiled. It was small and full of light. He reached out slowly and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. She did not pull away. "Do you want to stay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. I think I want to stay with you." And for the first time since that day, she leaned in close, her head against his shoulder, letting the quiet hold them both. The past stayed behind them on that road. In the house they built from kindness. In the way Travis looked at her like she was the start of something better, and Tessa, after everything, started to believe him. The rains came late that year, and when they did, they came hard. For 2 days, water sluiced off the hills and turned the yard to a mess of brown slop. The boys stayed in, restless and loud, their games echoing through the house. Tessa kept to the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back, her movements steady and sure as she tended the fire and kept supper from burning. Travis spent the second night in the barn, checking the roof for leaks, mending what he could with pitch and old cloth. When he came in near midnight, soaked through to the skin, Tessa was still awake. She didn't speak, just handed him a towel and a dry shirt he hadn't realized she'd mended. "You should have gone to bed," he said, voice low so as not to wake the boys. "You looked cold." He didn't thank her, not aloud. He just took the shirt, changed by the fire, and let the warmth fill the space between them. By the third morning, the skies had cleared and the ground began to firm. Travis saddled the mare and took Rusty out to check the lower creek, leaving Ray with Tessa. The boy clung to her apron as she led him through the chores, his hand in hers as they fed the chickens and gathered the few dry eggs not ruined by the storm. "Will I be big like Pa someday?" Ray asked, eyes squinting up toward her as he tried to lift the bucket of feed. Tessa knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "I think you'll be kinder," she said softly. "But just as strong," Ray beamed. Later that afternoon, after the boys were fed, and the last of the laundry was hung to dry between the trees, Travis found Tessa sitting alone near the edge of the garden, stitching a patch onto one of Ray's trousers. Her brow was furrowed, but her hands worked smooth and even. "You always sew like that?" he asked, lowering himself onto the overturned crate beside her. "Like what?" "Like it keeps your thoughts from running off." She didn't look up. "Maybe it does." They sat in quiet for a while, the breeze tugging at the leaves above them. "Ray said you told him he'd be kinder than me," Travis said, not accusing, just curious. Tessa paused, then tied off the thread. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I didn't take it wrong." She set the trousers aside. "There's something about you. I've never seen a man do so much without asking anything back. I was raised by a woman who lost more than she ever said out loud. She taught me what staying looked like. She's still alive. No, been a long time." Tessa pulled her knees up to her chest. "Did she ever talk about it? Some things she did, some she didn't. I didn't push. I used to think if I ignored what happened, it'd stop mattering." He studied her face, the way the sunlight touched her cheek and caught in the fine lines at the corner of her mouth. "Has it?" "No," she said. "But it doesn't feel as heavy here." He nodded once. "That's something." The sound of hooves on dry ground reached them then, and Rusty came riding up from the creek, his boots caked in drying mud. "Pa, there's a calf stuck in the gully. Looks like it broke its leg." Travis stood. "Where?" "Past the bend by the cottonwoods." Tessa was already rising. "I'll keep Ray at the house." Travis hesitated, then said, "If I can't set it right, I may have to put it down." Tessa met his eyes. "I know." By dusk, the calf was settled in the shed, its leg splinted. Travis had carried it all the way back, Rusty leading the mare, neither of them speaking much. When they walked in, Ray was asleep on the rug, a folded quilt beneath his head, and Tessa was stirring something in the pot. "You get it?" she asked. "Got it. Might pull through." She brought him a bowl without being asked, sat across from him as he ate. Her hands were stained from blackberry juice. He could smell the pie cooling on the counter, but her hair was still pinned, her dress clean. She looked tired, but not worn. "You're not afraid of hard days," he said between bites. "I've known worse," she answered, then smiled just with the corner of her mouth. This one was all right. That night, after the boys were tucked under patchwork quilts and the lanterns turned low, Travis stepped out onto the porch. Tessa joined him without a word, wrapping her shawl tighter against the chill. He stared out toward the dark horizon. "You ever think about leaving?" "Sometimes," she said honestly. "But I don't want to." He turned to her. "What do you want?" "I want to wake up without dread. I want to hear the boys arguing and not flinch. I want to look at you and not feel like I'm waiting for you to tell me to go." "I'd never do that." "I know," she said, her voice catching. "That's why I stay." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers laced together, warm against the cool air. She leaned into him, head resting where his shoulder met his collarbone, and he felt the steadiness of her breath. For the first time, she wasn't holding herself apart. They stood like that until the stars turned cold above them, and the long ache of that day, the one she never spoke of, felt a little further behind. By late May, the pasture grass reached the horses' knees, and the cottonwoods cast wide shade over the south end of the property. The mornings came earlier now, the sun rising pale and quiet over the far hills, warming the edge of the porch where Travis stood with his coffee. Tessa was in the barn with Ray, showing him how to braid a lead rope from old twine. She had taken to teaching him small things, useful things, with a patience that came from somewhere deep. Travis watched her for a while. She didn't know he was there. Her voice was soft even as she guided Ray's fingers with her own. The boy was clumsy, but eager. She smiled once, and it wasn't the sort of smile meant for show. It was real, and it settled into her like something she'd forgotten how to wear. That afternoon, a rider came up the road from town. Long-legged bay, lathered hard. The man in the saddle wore a deputy's badge pinned to a faded coat and carried himself like someone who knew how to use the pistol on his hip. Travis met him at the gate. "You Sutton?" the deputy asked, pulling his horse to a stop. "I am, looking for a girl. Name of Tessa Barnes." "Sheriff dropped her off the books last month," said she lit out toward Bridger Hollow. "That sound right to you?" "She's here," Travis said. "She's not hiding, but she's not yours to collect either." The deputy scratched his jaw. "Ain't here to take her, just needed to know she's alive." "There's a widow in Rock Springs, Mrs. Alina Brantley. Says Tessa's her niece, been asking around." Travis's jaw tightened. "And what does she want with her?" "Says she wants her back. Says Tessa was supposed to stay put after her daddy passed." "Might be she's worried about her name getting dragged through the mud. What with all that happened?" Travis didn't answer right away. He could hear the screen door open behind him, the creak of Tessa's boots on the porch boards. "She doesn't want anything to do with that woman," he said finally. "I reckon that's her choice," the deputy allowed, glancing past Travis. "Just tell her someone's looking, and they'll keep looking." He turned his horse and rode off without waiting for more. Tessa stepped down into the yard, arms folded tight. "I heard him. Didn't figure he meant trouble," Travis said, "but I didn't like the tone. She's not my kin, not really. My father took me in when I was little. My mother was her sister, but I never knew her. Alina only wrote when she needed money or someone to care for her when the help left." Her voice was flat, but her eyes were sharp. "She doesn't want me back. She wants the story gone. I'm not sending you anywhere." "I know." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back, not from him, just from the weight of the past pressing near again. "I won't be spoken for like I'm a burden someone misplaced," she said. "You're not. You never were." She looked down at the dust between her boots. "If she sends someone else, I'll tell them myself. I'm not afraid of her." "I know that too." That night, Tessa sat outside long after the boys went to bed. Travis joined her when the fire had burned low. The wind had settled, and the sky stretched wide and cloudless above them. "Was he the one who told the sheriff to take me?" she asked. "I don't know," Travis said, "but I wouldn't put it past her to want it done quiet." Tessa nodded, her face unreadable in the dark. "She used to say I reminded her of my mother, said I had her mouth, her stubbornness. But I think what she meant was she hated me for something I couldn't help." He didn't answer, not with words, just reached out and took her hand again, gently this time, and she let him. After a long silence, she turned toward him. "Do you think people can come back from being unwanted?" "I think wanting's a choice," he said. "And I choose you." Her breath caught. Then she leaned in, not with hesitation, but with intent, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was quiet, steady, and certain. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was an answer. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. "I've never felt like I belonged anywhere," she whispered. "You do now," she nodded, eyes closed. "I believe you." In the house behind them, the fire crackled low and the boys slept under patched quilts. Outside, the night air was cool but not sharp, and the wind carried no warnings. Only the scent of new hay and pine, and the sound of two people learning what it meant to hold still long enough to be loved. June settled over the land with the smell of warm sage and the sound of cottonwood leaves brushing each other like whispers. The days stretched long, and the boys spent more time outdoors, working or wandering the edges of the property with sticks in hand, hunting frogs or pretending to be scouts. Tessa took to tending the garden early before the heat pressed down, sleeves rolled, hands deep in soil that gave easily beneath her fingers. She had begun humming again, soft and tuneless, as she moved through her work. Travis noticed, but never pointed it out. He knew better than to name a thing still finding its shape. That morning, he returned from the north fence with a length of broken wire and a shallow cut on his forearm. Tessa saw him coming before he reached the porch. "You get caught on the post?" she asked, taking the rag from his hand before he could wipe the blood clean. Rusty dropped the spool. I reached to catch it. Didn't quite. She led him inside without another word, fetched the tin of salve from the cupboard, and sat him down at the table. Her touch was careful but not timid. "You've got the hands of someone who's done this before," he said as she worked. "I had to learn early. We lived too far from anyone who could help. Your father teach you, for some things, but mostly I watched. If he could do it with one hand, I figured I could do it with two." Travis was quiet a moment. "You miss him," she nodded once. "I do, not every day anymore. But when I think about what I'd tell him now, I wish he were still around to hear it." "What would you tell him?" "That there's a place here where I can breathe. That I'm not afraid to wake up anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, the way a man does when he's almost ready to say something he's carried too long. But she spoke again before he could. "You were right. Wanting is a choice. I've started to want things again." He didn't ask what. He didn't have to. That evening, after supper and chores and a quiet hour with the boys curled up beside her while she read from an old book of folk tales, she found Travis out by the corral. He was leaning against the fence, watching the cattle shift beneath the moonlight. She walked up beside him, arms crossed, eyes on the herd. "I've been thinking," she said. He waited, "about what it would mean to stay for good." His jaw moved, but he said nothing. "I'm not asking for anything, just I want to make this life part of mine in a way that doesn't feel borrowed. You want to be needed. I want to be chosen." He turned to her then. "You are, every day." She faced him. "Then let me build something here, not just help with the cooking and the boys. I want to take 'em part of the land. The southern field's been fallow too long. That's tough ground, not easy to work. I never needed things to be easy." He watched her for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right, it's yours if you want it." "I do." He stepped closer, hands loose at his sides. "You're not the same woman I found by that busted wagon." "I know," she said quietly, "and I hope I never am again." He took her face in his hands then, slow and sure, as if asking permission without a word. She leaned in first, and when he kissed her, it was without hesitation. There was nothing left to question, nothing left to hold back. Later, they sat on the porch, the night air soft around them, the boys asleep inside. Her hand rested over his heart, his arm around her shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "You do." His voice was steady. "And you always will." She closed her eyes, letting the quiet settle into her bones. The past was still there, somewhere down the road behind them, but it no longer followed close. Here, under this roof and in this man's arms, she had found her place, and she would never be left behind again. By July, the earth had hardened underfoot, and the days came hot and windless. Tessa's southern field had taken root. The beans climbed the stakes she'd tied with strips of old cloth, and the squash pushed wide leaves across the furrows. She carried a tin pail from row to row each morning, checking for beetles, speaking aloud now and then, not to anyone, just to the plants, as if they were learning to listen. Travis kept to the western pasture where the cattle had taken to lazing beneath the pines. Most afternoons, he returned with his shirt damp and his hat pulled low, and Tessa would meet him at the pump with a basin and a clean cloth. They didn't speak much during those moments, but the silence settled between them like something familiar and chosen. One evening, when the sky burned low with the last light, Tessa set a small parcel in front of him on the table. It was wrapped in cloth, tied with twine. He raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside, folded with care, was a checkered shirt she'd sewn from leftover scraps and a bit of muslin. The buttons were mismatched, but the seams were strong. "I figured you'd worn through everything else," she said, eyes steady. "And I wanted something of mine on you when you're out there." He ran his fingers across the fabric. "You made this for me." "I did." He stood, walked around the table, and kissed her temple. "Then I'll wear it every day." Rusty burst in from outside, breathless. Ray's stuck in the ash tree again. Tessa turned, already moving. "How high?" "Not far, but he's crying." By the time they reached him, Ray's foot was lodged in the fork of two low branches. Travis climbed up to ease the boy loose, while Tessa waited below with her arms out. When Ray dropped into them, he wrapped his arms tight around her neck and didn't let go. That night, after the boys were asleep, she lit a lantern and sat on the edge of the porch, her feet bare against the warm wood. Travis joined her with a mug of water, handed it to her, then sat down beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "You ever think about what this would have been like if we'd met under different circumstances?" he asked. "No," she said, "because then it wouldn't have been us." "Not like this." He turned to her. "You ever think about marrying again?" "I do." He didn't say anything for a while, just watched the trees shift in the darkness, the lantern casting soft light across her face. "Because I've been thinking about asking," he said. "But I wanted to give you space." "There's no more space left between us, Travis." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring that wasn't gold or silver but carved from smooth antler, polished and worn from handling. "It's not much," he said, "but it's what I have." She held out her hand. "Then it's what I want." He slid it onto her finger and she leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. They were married under the cottonwoods, a week later. The preacher from Fort Bridger came out on horseback, and Rusty and Ray stood tall in their best shirts, boots scrubbed, hair combed flat. Tessa wore a dress she'd sewn from blue calico, and Travis shaved clean for the first time in months. Afterward, the boys chased each other through the tall grass while Tessa and Travis stood by the garden, watching the beans climb higher. He reached for her hand, and she laced her fingers through his. "You ready for all of it?" she asked. "I've been ready since the day you got off my horse and didn't run." That night, they sat on the porch while the boys slept, a soft breeze turning the heat of the day into something bearable. Tessa leaned back against him, her eyes closed, his arm around her waist. "I've never had a home that felt like mine," she said. "You do now." The sound of crickets rose in the grass, and the moon crept higher, silvering the edge of the barn and the tops of the trees. Inside, the floorboards creaked with settling wood, and the stars blinked steady above them. Years passed. The southern field stayed green, and Tessa's rows doubled. A second barn went up behind the first, built slow with help from neighbors, and paid for with good cattle and steady trade. Rusty grew tall and lean, took to carpentry, and Ray spent most days with the livestock, gentling colts with a touch that reminded Travis of his mother. Tessa bore a daughter the following spring, her hands strong even in labor, her voice calm through the storm of it. They named the girl Clara. She had Tessa's dark eyes and Travis's quiet. She grew up barefoot and bright, always with dirt under her nails and a song on her lips. By the time the war stories faded from the saloons, and the telegraph lines reached the edge of the territory, the Sutton Ranch had become known for its kindness as much as its stock. Travelers took to stopping there, not for shelter alone, but for the warmth at its heart, two people who had once been broken by different things and had chosen, every day since, to stay. And in the quiet hours, when the children slept and the fire burned low, Travis would run his thumb along the curve of Tessa's hand, the antler ring still worn smooth by time, and she would turn into him with a smile that had taken years to grow but never once faded. They had earned their peace. Every moment of it,